queen was strangled inside her own palace with her own braided hair on the orders of a family she had ruled for. In another century, a Roman empress died alone at 86, while her son, the emperor she made, refused to visit her deathbed. A French queen escaped down a rope ladder from a castle where her own boy had locked her in. A Byzantine empress had her head shaved by the son she adopted. A Chinese empress was handed a document by her own child that ended 15 years of her reign in a single morning. 10 queens, 10 countries, 10 centuries. In every case, the person holding the knife, the pen, or the door key was the heir. This is a private file, and it opens the same way 10 times. Start with the one everyone half knows, Isabella of France. English textbooks call her the she-wolf, and that name has done work to hide the truth of what her son did to her. She had helped Edward III take the throne of England. She had invaded the country with her lover, Roger Mortimer. She had forced her own husband, Edward II, to abdicate. By 1330, she was ruling England in her son's name from inside Nottingham Castle. She held the treasury, the seals, the keys. She thought she still held her son. The problem was the calendar. Edward III turned 17, then approached 18. The boy who had signed documents his mother placed in front of him was starting to read them first. In March 1330, Mortimer made a mistake he could not walk back. He had Edmund, Earl of Kent, the king's own uncle, executed for treason. The young king watched, said nothing, and started counting. He counted 22 young knights he could trust. William Montague led them. October 19th, 1330. Parliament had been summoned to Nottingham. Mortimer and Isabella slept inside the castle behind locked gates. What they did not know was that the king's men had already slipped in through an underground passage that ran up through the rock. The passage still exists. Locals still call it Mortimer's Hole. They climbed up in the dark, joined the young king inside the keep, and burst into the chamber where Mortimer and Isabella were meeting. 2 of Mortimer's guards were killed. Mortimer was seized. The chronicles record that Isabella cried out through the door, "Fair son, have pity on gentle Mortimer." He ignored her. 6 weeks later, Mortimer was hanged at Tyburn. Isabella lost everything that mattered that night. Her estates were taken back into the crown. She was moved to Berkhamsted, then to Castle Rising in Norfolk. The old story that she went mad and was locked away is not true. She lived 28 more years in comfortable retirement, hunting, hawking, reading French romances. Her son visited her. He wrote polite letters. He simply never allowed her near government again. She had raised a son and a king, and had not realized the two are not the same thing. Every kingdom she had taken for him became a room he could keep her in. Some sons take the crown quietly. Others ride to their mother's door with earls. Number 9. Emma of Normandy. Almost nobody remembers her name now, and that is part of the story. She had been Queen of England twice, married to Ethelred the Unready, then to the man who conquered him, Canute the Great. Mother of 2 kings. Wealthiest woman in England for 40 years. She held the royal treasury at Winchester in her own hands. Her weakness was inside her own family. She had 2 sons by her first husband, Edward and Alfred, and a son named Harthacnut by her second. She had spent decades preferring the second family over the first. Edward had grown up in Norman exile. His brother Alfred had been captured coming back to England and blinded so brutally that he died. Edward blamed her. The resentment had 30 years to become something colder. Harthacnut died suddenly in June, 1042. Edward, the son she had raised without, was crowned in April 1043. That November, he moved. He rode to Winchester with the 3 most powerful earls in England, Godwin, Leofric, Siward. This was a demonstration. They confronted Emma inside her own house and took the royal treasury. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records the reason in one brutal sentence. They deprived her of all the treasure that she had, which were immense, because she was formerly very hard upon the king her son. 50 years of political power taken in one afternoon. Some property was restored a year later, but her name faded from the witness lists. She died in Winchester in 1052. Her bones were placed inside painted stone mortuary chests in the old cathedral. 6 centuries later, during the English Civil War, parliamentarian soldiers broke open the chests and threw the royal bones across the cathedral floor. Someone gathered them up. Nobody knows anymore which bones are hers. Emma of Normandy, physically, is now mixed with the kings. She had been queen twice. She died a footnote once. Some sons take the treasury, others take the country and leave their mother stranded in it. Number 8. Isabeau of Bavaria, Queen of France under a mad king, Charles VI, the one who thought he was made of glass. For most of her adult life, Isabeau had been the crown's living pulse. Her husband screamed at ghosts in locked rooms. She arbitrated between Armagnacs and Burgundians. She kept a government running. Then her son, the Dauphin, the future Charles VII, helped organize the assassination of John the Fearless, Duke of Burgundy, on a bridge at Montereau in 1419. That single killing collapsed every piece she had built. Burgundy allied with England. Henry V's armies were already inside Normandy. Isabeau, cornered, signed the Treaty of Troyes on May 21, 1420. The treaty gave the French crown to the English king. It disinherited her own son. Historians still argue how much was her choice and how much was force. What is not argued is what it did to the family. She had removed him from the succession. He would remove her from history. Charles VII spent the next 12 years running a rump France from Bourges. Then Joan of Arc arrived. Then he was crowned at Reims. When the English were finally driven out and Paris returned to France, Charles did something no French king had ever done to his own mother. He never came for her. She was still in Paris, alive, 60 years old, living under English occupation. When Charles retook the city, she was not rescued. She was not restored. She was not visited. She was simply, formally, left there. She died on September 24, 1435. She was buried at Saint-Denis with almost no ceremony. Her funeral procession was so small that the boat carrying her coffin down the Seine was mocked. The saying that went around France in her last years was that the country had been lost by a woman and would be saved by a maid. Joan was the maid. Isabeau was the woman. He recovered a kingdom. He did not recover his mother. These were the queens whose sons only took their power. The next ones lost their hair, their homelands, their names. Number 7. Empress Zoe of Byzantium. She had been born in the porphyry chamber inside the great palace of Constantinople. In Byzantine terms, that meant something almost supernatural. Porphyrogenita. Born in the purple. Her face was on the coins of the empire. Her image was on the walls of Hagia Sophia. Her weakness was very simple. She had no children. By the winter of 1041, she was on her second husband, Michael IV, and he was dying. There was no heir. The Macedonian dynasty was one bad night from ending. So Zoe adopted a young man as her son. He was her husband's nephew, the son of a caulker who had worked in the shipyards. His nickname stuck to him forever. Michael the Caulker. She adopted him. She anointed him. When her husband died in December 1041, she personally placed the imperial crown on the head of this young man she had known for a matter of months. He became Michael V. He lasted 4 months. On the night of April 18, 1042, Michael turned on his adoptive mother. He accused her of trying to poison him. There was no trial. He had her head shaved. In Byzantine law, a woman with her hair cut off had been forcibly consecrated as a nun. Nuns cannot rule. It was a legal execution of her imperial identity, carried out with a pair of scissors. He shipped her to a convent on the island of Principo, in the Sea of Marmara. He announced it the next morning as if it were an administrative matter. Constantinople exploded. This is the part the young emperor did not calculate. The city had lived under Zoe's family for nearly 200 years. She was the dynasty made flesh. The mob poured into the streets. According to the eyewitness historian Michael Psellos, 3,000 people died in the fighting in a single day. Michael was forced to bring her back and parade her in her nun's habit. It only made it worse. On April 21st, the mob broke into the palace. Michael fled to the monastery of the Stodion. He was arrested inside it, blinded, and died a few months later on a small island. Zoe was empress again, but the shaved head remained. She wore a wig. On the mosaics of Hagia Sophia, where she still looks out at visitors today beside her third husband, look carefully at her face. Byzantine historians have long noted her portrait has been altered. Someone reset the tiles. She had lost her hair. He had lost his eyes. The city chose her. Zoe was punished by a son who was not her blood. The next queen was destroyed by one who was. Number 6. Marie de Medici, Queen Regent of France, mother of Louis XIII. She had been widowed the day after her coronation in May 1610, when a fanatic drove a knife into Henry IV's chest. Louis was 8. Marie became regent. She kept it legally for 4 years and illegally for 3 more, ignoring the fact that her son had come of age. She built the Luxembourg Palace to house herself. She hired Rubens to paint her life as 21 enormous canvases, showing her as a goddess mother of France. The paintings still hang in the Louvre. They are, in retrospect, the most expensive misreading of a son in art history. Louis was watching. In April 1617, at age 15, he authorized a coup against his mother's favorite, Concino Concini. Concini was shot in the courtyard of the Louvre. Marie was placed under house arrest at the Château de Blois. She was 43, and this is where the story becomes almost operatic. In February 1619, in the middle of the night, she escaped from Blois down a rope ladder over a 40-meter wall and into a waiting carriage. She raised an army. She fought her son. She lost. She was reconciled. She engineered the rise of a young cardinal named Richelieu, believing he would remain her ally. He did not. By 1630, Marie hated Richelieu. On November 10th, in the Luxembourg Palace, she confronted her son and demanded he dismiss the cardinal. Louis appeared to agree. That evening, he quietly rode to Versailles and met with Richelieu alone. He reversed himself. History remembers the day by the name a courtier gave it that night, the Day of the Dupes. Marie was exiled to Compiègne. In July 1631, she fled to Brussels. She never saw France or her son again. She spent 11 years wandering. Brussels, Amsterdam, London, where her son-in-law Charles I could not afford her. Then Cologne. Her only real friend by the end was Rubens, the painter who had once painted her as a goddess. He gave her a house he owned in Cologne. She had no money. She was refused a pension by her son. She wrote him letters. He did not answer. She died in that borrowed house on July 3, 1642, in destitution. Louis XIII did not attend her funeral. Her body was brought back to France 8 months later and buried at Saint-Denis without ceremony. In 1793, a revolutionary mob dug up her coffin and pulled tufts of hair from her skull. She had raised the king who exiled her. She built a palace in Paris and died in a borrowed room in Cologne. Marie died old and free. The next queen was the Emperor of China, and her son signed the document that ended her reign. Number 5. Wu Zetian, the only woman in the recorded history of China who took the title of Emperor, Huangdi, in her own name. In 690, at age 65, she interrupted the Tang dynasty and declared a new dynasty of her own, the Zhou. She ruled it for 15 years. By 705, she was 81 and in poor health. Years earlier, she had named her son Li Xian as her successor over her own Wu family nephews. She had deposed this same son 21 years earlier when he had shown too much independence, but she had brought him back and made him her heir. Around her, the palace had become fragile. 2 young court favorites, the Zhang brothers, held enormous influence and were universally hated. On February 20th, 705, the Chancellor Zhang Jianzhi led a small force into the palace. They killed the Zhang brothers on sight. Then they surrounded the emperor's chambers. Her son, Li Xian, was there. He had known about the coup. He had signed off on it. 3 days later, he took the throne as Emperor Zhongzong. The Zhou dynasty was ended. His mother's 15-year reign was over. Within months, she was demoted from emperor to empress dowager. She died in December 705. She was buried at Qianling Mausoleum. Outside the tomb stands a stele raised by her son. On every other Tang imperial stele, an inscription lists the achievements of the ruler buried beneath. Wu Zetian's stele has no inscription. It is blank. Some historians think she requested it. Some think her son could not decide what to write. Some think he refused to write anything at all. She had rewritten the rules for who could sit on the throne of China. Her son used those same rules to erase her name from the reign lists for 1,000 years. Some sons take the crown. The next chapter is about the sons who took something worse, the space beside their mother's grave. Number 4. Catherine de' Medici, Queen of France, then Queen Mother, then de facto regent for 3 of her own sons in succession: Francis II, Charles IX, Henry III. She held the French monarchy together with her bare hands for 30 years, through 8 civil wars, writing more than 6,000 letters that survive today. By 1588, the situation had turned catastrophic. The Duke of Guise, head of the Catholic League, effectively controlled Paris. Henry III had been chased out of his own capital on the day of the barricades. Catherine, almost 70 and in poor health, dragged herself back into the city and personally negotiated with Guise. She engineered the Edict of Union in July, keeping her son on the throne on paper. She thought she had steadied the situation one more time. Her son had stopped listening to her weeks earlier. On December 23, 1588, at the Château de Blois, Henri III summoned the Duke of Guise to the king's chamber. His personal bodyguards, the 45, were waiting. As Guise entered, they surrounded him and stabbed him repeatedly. He died at the foot of the king's bed. The next morning, Guise's brother, the Cardinal of Guise, was hacked to death in the palace dungeons. Catherine knew nothing. She was in her sickbed on the floor directly below. She had not been told. She had not been consulted. Henry III came downstairs to inform her. According to the diarist Pierre de L'Estoile, he opened her door and said, "Please forgive me. Monsieur de Guise is dead. I have had him killed." Her response, recorded by a friar who visited her days later, has been remembered for 4 centuries. "Oh, wretched man! What has he done? Pray for him. I see him rushing toward his ruin." She died 13 days later, on January 5, 1589. L'Estoile wrote that those close to her believed her life had been shortened by her displeasure over her son's deed. Because Paris was held by her son's enemies, she could not be buried at Saint-Denis. She was buried provisionally in the church at Blois. Decades later, her remains were moved to Saint-Denis. Then, in 1793, revolutionaries opened the royal tombs, and Catherine's bones were thrown into a mass grave. Henry III was assassinated 8 months after her death. He named the Protestant Henry of Navarre as his heir. The Valois dynasty, the dynasty Catherine had spent her entire adult life defending, ended with the son who had not told her he was about to change history. She had governed France for 30 years by keeping every knife sheathed. Her son unsheathed one, and it killed them both. Catherine's son ended her life by accident. The next queen's son ended hers by choice, and took his time doing it. Number 3. Livia Drusilla, first Empress of Rome, wife of Augustus for 51 years, priestess of the deified Augustus after his death, mother, grandmother, great-grandmother, and great-great-grandmother of Roman emperors. She had, over decades of quiet political engineering, made her son Tiberius the second emperor of Rome. Every rival for the succession had somehow died: Marcellus, Gaius, and Lucius, Agrippa Posthumus. Roman historians could not prove she had killed any of them. They also could not stop suggesting it. When Augustus finally died in 14 AD, Tiberius took the throne, and everyone in Rome knew who had put him there. Tiberius knew it too. He had been forced by Augustus, years earlier, to divorce a wife he loved to marry into the succession. He blamed his mother. He also could not stand the persistent Roman assumption that his throne was really her achievement. Once he was emperor, he began, quietly and systematically, to erase her from public life. The Senate voted her the title Mother of the Fatherland. Tiberius forbade it. Senators voted her honors. Tiberius vetoed them. He forbade her a ceremonial guard. He forbade an altar to celebrate her adoption into the Julian family. In 26 AD, Tiberius left Rome. He retired to Capri and never governed in person again. Ancient historians universally believed one reason was to physically escape his mother. She fell ill in 29 AD. She was 86. He did not come. She died. He did not come. He wrote a letter to the Senate saying important business prevented him from attending. Her funeral was delayed while the letter traveled. Her great-grandson Caligula, then a teenager, delivered the eulogy. Then Tiberius went further. The Senate voted to deify her. Tiberius vetoed it. The Senate voted an arch in her honor, unprecedented for a Roman woman. Tiberius was designated to fund it. He never paid. The arch was never built. She had written a will with bequests to her friends and staff. Tiberius refused to execute it. Caligula, when he became emperor, was the one who finally paid Livia's bequests. Deification came only in 42 AD, when her grandson Claudius took the throne. 13 years after her death, an emperor she had personally treated with scorn during his childhood because of his limp and his stammer restored her to divinity. Livia became a goddess, 13 years late, on the initiative of the grandson she had disliked because the son she had loved refused. She had built the Roman Empire in the quiet ways empires are actually built. Her son let it forget her name for 13 years. These queens were buried carelessly. The next queens were killed carefully. Number 2. Cosum, Sultan. Here the file gets darker because the killing happens inside a working palace at the hands of a family faction. She was the mother of 2 Ottoman sultans, the grandmother of a 3rd, and the sitting regent of the empire on the night she died. She was strangled inside Topkapi Palace on September 2nd, 1651. The killers were serving her own grandson. For 50 years, she had been the most powerful woman in Ottoman history. She had entered the harem as a Greek girl from Tinos, kidnapped as a teenager, sold as a slave, renamed. Her son Murad IV became sultan, and she ruled through him. Her son Ibrahim became sultan, and she ruled through him too, until his madness became so dangerous that she gave her consent for him to be deposed and strangled in 1648. Then her 7-year-old grandson, Mehmed IV, became sultan, and she declared herself regent for the 2nd time in her life. Her weakness was inside her own household. Mehmed's biological mother was Turhan Hatice Sultan. Under Ottoman tradition, the mother of the sitting sultan was the highest woman in the empire. Turhan was that woman by title. Kosum was that woman in reality. 2 valid sultans could not exist in one palace. By 1651, Kosem allegedly began planning to depose her own grandson Mehmed and replace him with his half-brother. The plot was betrayed by one of Kosem's own slaves. Turhan struck first. On the night of September 2nd, her faction moved through the harem. Kosem hid inside a wardrobe. She was found. The Venetian ambassador and the Ottoman chronicler Naima, along with the renegade Bobovi, all recorded versions of what happened next. Some accounts say she was strangled with a curtain cord. Bobovi's version is more famous. He wrote that she was strangled with her own braided hair, which the killers wrapped around her neck when they could not find another cord fast enough. She was 62, and she did not go quietly. She died on the floor of the palace she had run for a generation. The next morning, when the news reached the streets of Constantinople, the city went silent. Mosques closed. Markets closed. Public mourning lasted 3 days, spontaneously, without imperial order. The Janissaries rioted. The people gave her a title that stuck, Valida-e Shahide, the martyred mother. She was buried at the Blue Mosque, inside the tomb complex of her husband, Sultan Ahmed I. Tourists walk past her sarcophagus every day. Most have no idea who she is. She had feared the assassin outside the gate. The assassin came through the door she had opened herself. Kosum died by faction. The final queen died by design. Number 1. Agrippina the Younger. This is where the file ends, because there is no crueler version of what a son can do to his mother in the history of the Roman state. Daughter of Germanicus, great-granddaughter of Augustus, sister of one emperor, Caligula, wife of another, her uncle Claudius. She had spent her entire life inside the machinery of imperial power, and she had used it to place her son on the Roman throne. She had persuaded Claudius to adopt her son over his own biological son. She had almost certainly, according to Tacitus, Suetonius, and Cassius Dio in agreement, poisoned Claudius with mushrooms in 54 AD. Her son became emperor at 16. His name was Nero. For the first years of his reign, she appeared on the coins of the empire beside him. She attended Senate meetings from behind a curtain. She was called Augusta in her own lifetime. She was, functionally, the co-ruler of Rome. Nero was not grateful. He was 17. He wanted to marry Poppaea Sabina, and his mother stood in the way. Between 55 and 59 AD, he stripped her of everything: her honors, her guards, her residences. He expelled her from the imperial palace on the Palatine Hill. Then he began trying to kill her. Suetonius records 3 separate poisonings. Each one failed. Agrippina had spent years building tolerance by taking small doses of antidotes. Then Nero rigged a mechanical ceiling above her bed to collapse on her while she slept. She was warned by a servant. She avoided the room. He tried the sea next. In March of 59 AD, Nero invited his mother to a festival at Baiae. He gave her every honor. He seated her above himself at the banquet. He kissed her when she left. Tacitus, in Book 14 of the Annals, wrote the scene with a novelist's eye. The ship prepared for her return journey had been specially built. A section was designed to detach at sea. A heavy lead canopy above her couch was rigged to fall. The ship sailed at night. The canopy collapsed. It killed her attendant, Creperius Gallus. Agrippina was pinned, but not killed, because the high sides of her couch held the weight of the lead off her body. The ship broke apart on cue. Agrippina and her companion, Acerronia Paula, went into the water. Acerronia, believing help was coming, cried out that she was Agrippina. The sailors, following orders, beat her to death with oars. Agrippina, understanding exactly what was happening, swam in silence. A fishing boat picked her up. She reached the shore near her villa at Bauli, wounded on the shoulder. She sent a messenger to Nero, telling him she had survived a shipwreck by the favor of the gods, and asking him not to trouble himself to visit her. Nero panicked. He called in his freedman, Anicetus, the same man who had built the ship. Anicetus took soldiers to Bauli. They surrounded the villa. They entered her bedroom. According to Tacitus, when the assassins raised their weapons, Agrippina pointed to her own abdomen and told them where to strike. She said, "Strike here. This is what carried Nero." She was cremated that same night on a dining couch in her own villa, without ceremony. Nero sent a letter to the Senate blaming her for a conspiracy. The Senate voted thanksgivings. Her birthday was declared inauspicious, but Rome knew. Graffiti appeared on walls. Nero, Orestes, Alcmaeon, matricides all. Tacitus wrote that Nero was afterward haunted, that he heard trumpets from the hills near her grave, that he left that part of Italy and could not return to it. She had bet her entire life on making him emperor. She had lifted him onto the throne with her own hands. And when she finally understood what she had made, in the last seconds of her life, she looked at the men her son had sent, pointed at the part of her body that had carried him, and told them to aim there.